He slid the loan papers across the table and said, "Sign." I trusted him because blood is supposed to mean something here. 6 months later, the bank called me, not him, sounding mechanical. My name alone glittered in ink like a trap finally sprung. I stared at the balance, then whispered, "I won't chase him. I will pay every dollar and balance his memory. I will make dignity my ledger and discipline my accountant. I will answer every call before sunrise without flinching anymore. I will learn patience where panic used to live inside." That was the promise that replaced every broken thing immediately. Jared smiled that day like men smile before storms roll in. "We're partners," he said, palms up like a magician's flourish. The banker nodded, polite as paint drying on borrowed walls. I signed, because brothers share risk, and hope loves shortcuts, unfortunately. Mom texted confetti emojis. Dad wrote, "Make us proud, son. I forgot pride can get expensive when people worship momentum." Jared snapped a selfie, captioned, "Future legends, 2 kings, 1 dream together." I laughed, small and loyal, thinking this was Brotherhood becoming business. The dealership lease gleamed under fluorescent lights, a showroom smelling like future. We popped warm soda, toasting nothing that would actually hold weight. The first month looked promising, a parade of secondhand chrome dreams. Jared shook hands like pastors bless pews on festive Sundays. I cleaned carburetors, posted photos, and balanced a squeaky chair. We sold 3 cars to cousins who wanted to believe. The 4th came back leaking, and the 5th never even started. Jared said, "It'll turn," like faith could crank dead engines. He bought banners, hats, and branded mugs we couldn't afford. I bought brake pads, coolant, and sleepless nights nobody else noticed. The landlord called twice. Jared charmed him with future numbers. I watched the calendar chew weeks the way rust chews fenders. When the loan payment hit, it hit like a tire iron. Jared said, "I've got it," and smiled behind a deadline. He didn't have it, not then, not later, never. The 2nd payment snarled, the 3rd arrived with interest breathing heavier. I sold my TV, drained savings, and pawned a guitar. Jared posted sunsets with captions about grinding and gratitude online. I posted receipts, spreadsheets, and apologies to people expecting cars. The banker stopped smiling and switched to scripts with practiced empathy. By Thanksgiving, we were underwater while Jared vacationed networking in Miami. I watered fake palms and practiced optimism until it cracked loudly. December delivered the notice with neat edges and clean fonts. Past due morphed into default while frost tightened around Kansas City. I called Jared twice. Both calls slid into cheerful voicemail. He texted, "Back soon, hold the fort," then stopped responding entirely. The bank officer said my name carefully, like stepping on ice. "Mr. Whitlock, you alone guaranteed this note," she explained patiently. A loan felt heavier than $82,000 landing on ribs. I drove to our parents' bungalow and parked beneath weak lights. Mom opened the door, hope first, then worry, then questions everywhere. Dad folded his arms like doors closing against winter and disappointment. Jared finally called on Christmas Eve, voice grinning like he'd won something. "Relax, bro, I have a new investor," he promised confidently. Behind him, music thumped like guilt practicing its alibi rhythmically. "Send me the account access," he added. "I'll stabilize everything tonight." I stared at the tree, blinking lights counting my better choices. "No," I said, surprising both of us with new backbone entirely. "Return and face it," I added, words steady like tightened bolts. He inhaled sharply, then laughed, then hung up without another word. Snow hit the windshield while I sat unmoving, learning consequences wait. Somewhere, a siren wailed. Somewhere, a plan finally started breathing. The dealership died New Year's week. Lights off, phones silent, doors chained. I handed over keys with palms that finally didn't shake. The bank officer's pen glided, recording what I already knew. I signed a repayment schedule that looked bigger than seasons. She said, "You'll need 2 jobs," and slid brochures toward me. I nodded, because humiliation can still learn obedience when necessary. Outside, wind cut through my coat like honesty through excuses. I checked my wallet, counted $27, then counted breaths. Dignity wouldn't erase debt, but it could organize the days. I whispered, "We settle this with hours, not arguments," and meant it. I moved out of my apartment and into my truck. The cab smelled like coffee, rubber, and decisions made quietly. Lyle Peterson found me sleeping behind his garage one morning. He tapped the window, then waved me inside without ceremony. "You can sweep," he said, "and crash on the cot." His shop felt like a church built from sockets and grease. He didn't ask about Jared. Small towns already know everything. "Pay me with work," Lyle said, sliding over a broom. I started sweeping futures into a single tidy pile nightly. Every stroke sounded like interest shrinking by microscopic, stubborn inches. Mom invited me for Sunday dinner, and I finally said yes. She served pot roast and asked about repayment with trembling gentleness. Dad cleared his throat and said, "Proud you're standing, son." He never said much, but tonight those 4 words held everything. I told them the plan. 2 jobs, strict budget, no shortcuts. Mom cried quietly, then folded napkins like blessings into squares. I drove back to the garage under a sky learning mercy. Jared's silence stretched, but mine started growing muscles instead. I'd become the ledger and the lockbox and the lookout. Regret would pay interest, even if I never sent an invoice. The last night of January, I counted tools like prayers. Wrenches lined up gleaming, each one worth an hour somewhere. I logged debts owed, payments due, and jobs scheduled weekly. Lyle handed me a faded shop shirt with my name stitched. "You show up," he said. "That's where men begin again." I folded the shirt, lungs calmer than they'd been in months. My phone buzzed with spam and one withheld number breathing. I let it ring until the dark learned better manners. I wasn't running anymore. I was clocking in permanently tonight. Debt had my name, but dignity finally had my signature. Lyle's garage became my universe. Small, oil-stained, humming with ghosts of old engines. I woke before dawn each day, washing my face in cold sink water that smelled like rust and survival. My cot creaked against the wall. Thin blanket, thinner hope. The nights felt longer here, every sound magnified. A dripping pipe, a mouse, my own heartbeat trying to stay steady. I swept floors, scrubbed tools, cleaned spills no one caused but me. My hands cracked from degreaser and cold, but I didn't complain. Complaining was for people who had choices. I had debt, and debt was a language I spoke fluently now. Meals were whatever Lyle forgot to finish, usually half sandwiches or coffee gone bitter. He didn't talk much, but sometimes silence is mercy in human form. I spent my days fixing what other people had broken, cars, parts, sometimes myself in small ways. One afternoon, Lyle tossed me a wrench and said, "You can learn or you can quit. Pick one." I chose learning. I watched how bolts were fused until patience met precision, how timing mattered more than muscle. Fixing engines made sense. They failed for reasons you could trace. People failed for reasons that changed every time you asked them. Lyle's radio played country songs about heartbreak and grit, and I found rhythm and repetition. Every car that rolled out of that shop left me a little steadier. I didn't smile often, but when I did, it felt like work worth doing. Nighttime was the worst, and quiet grew teeth. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the day I signed those papers. Jared's grin haunted me like headlights in fog, bright, empty, impossible to ignore. The loan officer's voice still echoed in dreams. "You're the responsible party, Mr. Whitlock." Responsible. That word cut deeper than any debt ever could. I thought about driving to wherever Jared was hiding and demanding answers, but what would that fix? I had no gas money, no plan, and no strength for begging. Revenge was too expensive a habit. Survival cost enough already. So I stayed, breathing through every minute like it was a payment plan. Sometimes the phone rang in the office. Creditors calling for Jared. Lyle would hand me the receiver, his eyes quiet but knowing. "He's not here," I'd say, and hang up before they could ask more. I started keeping a notebook of what I owed. The bank, utilities, the garage rent. I added one more line at the bottom. Myself. I didn't know what number belonged there, so I left it blank. I figured I'd fill it in when peace felt earned. I stopped checking Jared's social media too. Every smiling photo was another knife disguised as nostalgia. I needed new pictures, ones made from grease, sweat, and honest hours. February wind slammed through the cracks in the shop, turning the air metallic. I wrapped my hands in rags to stay warm, hammering rusted bolts free. A customer dropped off a busted pickup, engine locked like a clenched fist. "You can junk it," he said. "Ain't worth the effort." I looked at it and saw myself. Tired, dented, underestimated. "Let me try," I said. 3 nights later, it roared back to life. The man stared, then handed me $50 cash. "You're wasted here," he said. Maybe he was right, but I wasn't ready to leave. This place was my penance. You don't abandon the altar before the prayer's finished. Lyle noticed the change in me before I did. "You're working like a man chasing something invisible," he said. I didn't answer. He nodded like that was answer enough. He started teaching me bookkeeping between oil changes, parts costs, taxes, supply orders. "Know your numbers," he said. "If you don't, someone else will." Those words hit harder than any insult Jared ever threw. I wrote them on the wall above my cot in permanent marker. When my arms ached or my resolve cracked, I'd look at that phrase and start over. Maybe I couldn't escape what Jared had done, but I could outwork it, outlast it, and eventually outlive it. By March, I was strong again, not in body but in decision. I stopped counting how much Jared owed me and started counting how many days I could go without thinking his name. The number grew slowly, 3 days, then 5, then sometimes a week. Every night, I wiped grease from my hands and whispered, "Still here." That became my new prayer. I was still here, and that was something no loan could repossess, but even survival has bills of its own. One morning, the bank called again. The woman's voice was the same, professional, polite, merciless. "Mr. Whitlock, your next payment is due in 5 days." I looked around the shop, at the half-fixed engines, the dusty windows, the jar of quarters I'd saved. I had just enough to cover half. "I'll make it," I said, even though I wasn't sure how. When I hung up, Lyle said, "You'll figure it out." I asked, "How do you know?" He smiled faintly, "Because you already have." That night, I sat in my truck and did the math again. Numbers blurred, but one truth stayed sharp. Jared's choices had left me buried, but he hadn't killed me. The difference mattered. Tomorrow I'd find a second job. I didn't know what or where, but if it existed, I'd take it. Dignity wasn't free. It was hourly, paid in sweat and time. I closed my notebook, I crossed out myself, and wrote beside it, "Still pending." Spring arrived smelling like oil and wet pavement. The snow melted into puddles that mirrored my truck's rusted edges, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to clarity. I found a second job delivering parts for a supply warehouse across town. The pay was lousy, the hours brutal, but it kept gas in my tank and my mind off debt collectors. Every morning, I woke before sunrise, brewed thin coffee, and drove past billboards selling quick wealth and fake hope. My world had become small but predictable, and in that smallness, I found safety. Lyle laughed when I started showing up earlier than him. "You trying to outrun the sun?" he asked. "Just catching up to it," I said. The rhythm was steady. Work, sweat, eat, sleep, repeat. The pain dulled because it finally had purpose. The old Chevy pickup I'd repaired sat behind the shop, engine solid but body bruised. One night after finishing deliveries, I walked out back, flashlight in hand, and looked at it differently. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a mirror. The cab smelled like mildew and metal, the kind of scent that reminded you how much something had survived. I sat inside, ran my fingers along the cracked steering wheel and whispered, "You and me, huh?" The radio didn't work, but I didn't need music. I decided then that I'd restore it piece by piece. Not to sell, not to show off, but to prove to myself that broken things could still move forward if someone just kept turning the wrench. Word spread around town about the guy who could fix anything. People came with small jobs. Lawnmower engines, alternators, brakes that squealed louder than their owners admitted. Some paid cash, some paid in favors, some just brought coffee and conversation. I didn't mind. Every repair was another brick in the wall between me and the man I used to be. I named the truck Mercy, not because I wanted any, but because that's what I needed to learn how to give. To machines, to people, maybe someday to Jared. Lyle saw the changes and shook his head with a grin. "You're turning this place into a real operation, Whitlock." I smiled. "Guess even wrecks can run if you feed them hope." Still, there were nights when the old ache came back. I'd see Jared's name pop up on news feeds or mutual posts, smiling in a new city, wearing a new suit, shaking new hands. He'd become the ghost that success forgot to haunt. I'd close the browser and focus on the bolts in front of me, forcing my breath to match the rhythm of tightening steel. Anger is a tool like any other. You can wield it, or it can ruin you. I decided to make mine useful. Each dollar I earned went into an envelope labeled Owed, tucked into my glove box. It wasn't just about the bank anymore. It was about me keeping my promise that no one would own my name again. By summer, I had a rhythm: warehouse by day, garage by night, sleep whenever the world allowed. June's heat pressed through the tin roof, and sweat became a kind of baptism. The radio in the shop played oldies that reminded me of the home Jared and I grew up in, where Dad fixed tractors and Mom hummed while folding laundry. Back then, debt was just a word adults used in whispers. Now it was a weight I'd learned to carry without complaint. Lyle called me his right hand, though he still barked orders like a drill sergeant. I didn't mind. Every command was a lesson, and every lesson was another layer of armor. One afternoon, a woman's car broke down just outside the shop. She was maybe mid-30s, worn but steady-eyed, her little boy sitting in the passenger seat clutching a stuffed bear. "Engine's smoking," she said, panic cracking her voice. I popped the hood and smelled coolant immediately. "You're lucky," I said. "Just a busted hose." She smiled through exhaustion. "Lucky's not something I've heard lately." I fixed it for free, refusing her cash. She left a note the next day. "Thank you for helping without asking why." I pinned it above my cot, a reminder that kindness didn't need witnesses to count. The Chevy came back to life one quiet Sunday. I replaced the plugs, rewired the ignition, and prayed to whatever gods watched over stubborn men. When the engine finally turned, it was more than sound. It was a heartbeat. I leaned back, covered in grease, and laughed like I hadn't in years. Lyle walked out, coffee in hand, and said, "That thing was dead when you found it." "So was I said, and meant it. He nodded, took a sip, and said, "Guess we both like revivals." That night, I drove Mercy around the empty streets, the windows down, the wind carrying away the last of my shame. By August, I'd paid off 2 more installments on the loan. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Lyle handed me an envelope one morning. Inside was a paycheck larger than usual. "You've earned more than I can afford to pay, but I'll try anyway," he said. I stared at it, unsure how to respond. "You planning something?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "My own shop one day." He grinned. "Good. This place needs competition." For the first time, I didn't just imagine surviving. I imagined owning something built by my own 2 hands. Something no one could sign me out of again. That night, before sleeping, I opened my notebook and crossed out another line. The debt was still high, the road still long, but for the first time I could see an end. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Almost there." June wagged her tail softly in her sleep beside me, as if she believed it too. By fall, I could smell change like rain before a storm. The shop no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a foundation. My savings envelope grew thicker each month, the word "owed" starting to fade from the ink rubbing against folded bills. Lyle handed me the keys more often now, trusting me to run things while he visited family or rested his back. I handled customers, suppliers, even taxes with a steadiness that surprised me. The old me would have been terrified of responsibility. Now I wore it like armor. The truck, Mercy, had become my companion, running smoother than most men I knew. I took her on late-night drives, down empty Kansas highways, the hum of the engine a sermon about second chances. The road no longer looked endless. It looked like mine. Word spread fast in towns like ours. People trusted honest work more than charm, and I had plenty of the first, none of the second. Farmers brought tractors, mothers brought minivans, and teens brought rusted dreams they called cars. I charged fair prices and fixed what others had given up on. Some customers tried to tip extra, but I always said the same thing: just come back when it breaks again. That kind of service built something bigger than income. It built reputation, and reputation, I learned, was louder than revenge. One morning, a man in a suit showed up, introducing himself as a regional supplier. "You're the guy who turned that garage into gold," he said. I laughed. More like iron and stubbornness. He handed me a card anyway. The work grew faster than I did. Lyle said, "You need your own name on the sign before people forget whose this is." It took me weeks to consider it, fear wrestling with ambition. But one quiet Sunday, I painted a new board with trembling hands. "Back Road Motors, Aaron Whitlock." I hung it by myself just before sunrise when the air still smelled clean. Lyle came by later, coffee in hand, pretending not to smile. "Looks official," he said. "Looks earned," I replied. That sign wasn't just wood. It was forgiveness nailed into something permanent. From that day, everything I fixed carried my signature, even when no one saw it. Of course, success doesn't erase ghosts. One evening, after a long shift, I opened my phone and saw Jared's face again. He'd launched something called Whitlock Motors, Bold letters, shining logo, a caption reading, "Some dreams are too big for small towns." I stared at the post until my eyes burned. The comments called him brilliant, fearless, unstoppable. Not one person mentioned what or who he'd stepped on to get there. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked to Mercy, placed my hand on the hood, and whispered, "Keep driving." Revenge wasn't silence, it was success without the need for applause. Winter crept back but couldn't scare me anymore. I hired a kid from town named Curtis to help part-time. He was 17, clumsy, and eager to learn, the same way I once was. "You ever mess up bad?" he asked once while changing oil. I smiled. "Only every day," I said. "Difference is, now I fix what I break." He grinned like I'd told him a secret. That boy reminded me what rebuilding looked like when you hadn't been broken yet. Watching him learn made me realize something. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was teaching, and that meant I'd finally climbed out of the hole Jared left me in. The shop's reputation reached the city by spring. Local papers wrote stories about the small-town mechanic who helps everyone even when they can't pay. A customer filmed me rescuing her car during a snowstorm, and somehow that video made it online. Overnight, my phone filled with messages, thank yous, job offers, partnerships. People said I inspired them. Funny word, inspire. It used to belong to people like Jared. Now it sat in my inbox with my name beside it. Lyle watched all this unfold and said, "Careful, fame's just another kind of debt." I nodded. I'd learned enough about those to keep receipts. With the attention came opportunity. A regional auto company reached out, offering to collaborate. My small-town name with their brand's muscle. It sounded surreal. I spent a week losing sleep, pacing, weighing pride against practicality. Then I said yes, but on my terms. The contract said Backroad Motors would stay independent. My rules, my ethics. When the deal was signed, I didn't celebrate. I went back to the shop, fixed an old carburetor, and whispered, "We're still us." That night, I sent my last payment to the bank. The debt was gone. My record was clean. But the scars, that was another kind of currency I wasn't ready to spend. A week later, I received a letter in a familiar handwriting. "Aaron," it read, "saw the article about you. Proud, really. Maybe we could talk sometime." It was signed Jared. I folded it neatly. No anger, no rush, no reply. Some debts can't be cleared with words, only time. Still, I placed it in the glove box beside the old payment receipts, proof that even regret has a place in the archive. That night, as the wind howled against the shop's siding, I felt something like peace settle inside me. I'd rebuilt everything he broke, but more importantly, I'd rebuilt me. In the morning, Lyle stood by the door, watching me open the shutters. "You know," he said, "you've turned this place into a church for broken things." I looked around, the cars, the tools, the oil stains that told their own stories. "Guess that makes you the pastor," I said. He chuckled. "No," he said softly, "you are." I smiled, turned the key, and listened as engines sang their morning hymn. The world outside was still rough, but for the first time I was no longer fighting it. I was part of it. By the time spring turned into humid summer, the shop was unrecognizable. Fresh paint covered the old tin walls, the sign gleamed under the sun, and the parking lot stayed full from open to close. Curtis handled oil changes while I juggled repairs, invoices, and a schedule that no longer allowed rest. Backroad Motors wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. One evening, as I locked up, a man in a navy suit approached. "Mr. Whitlock," said, adjusting his tie. "I'm from Midland Bank." My stomach tightened. That was the same bank that once took everything from me. "We've been following your progress," he continued. "We'd like to discuss a partnership." I almost laughed. 3 years ago, they'd hung up on me mid-sentence. "I'll think about it," I said, shaking his hand. This time, I was the one with leverage. The meeting happened a week later. Polished conference room, glass walls, the faint hum of wealth. They wanted me to join their small business initiative, help promote community lending programs. The irony was almost poetic. "Your story embodies resilience," the bank manager said. "We'd like to feature you in our campaign." I stared at the framed photos of executives on the wall, men who'd once been obstacles now asking for permission to borrow my image. "Sure," I said, calm but deliberate. "As long as the small guys get real help, not paperwork and promises." They agreed. I walked out with a new contract and a quiet smile. Revenge had never looked so professional. The commercial aired a month later, footage of me working on an engine, talking about second chances and honest work. The response was overwhelming. Customers doubled, donations poured in, and even Lyle, who hated attention, grinned when someone recognized him from the background shot. "Guess you're a star now," he teased. "Just a mechanic with better lighting," I said. Still, something in me shifted. The weight I'd carried for years felt lighter, replaced by something stronger. Dignity. The kind you earn one stubborn decision at a time. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low and the day's noise faded, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but instinct made me answer. "Aaron?" The voice on the other end froze me in place. It was Jared. His tone was softer, slower, without the swagger I remembered. "I saw your commercial," he said. "You look different." I didn't respond. "Listen," he continued, voice cracking. "I'm in trouble. The investors pulled out. The dealership, mine, it's collapsing. Silence stretched between us like distance you can't measure in miles. You always were good at fixing what's broken," he said finally. "Think you can help me this time?" I leaned against the counter, watching dusk settle through the open door. "You remember what you told me the night you disappeared?" I asked. "You said, 'Hold the fort.' Well, I did, and now it's mine." He didn't speak. I heard a sigh, maybe shame, maybe something too late to name. "I'm not calling to ask for money," he said. I just didn't know who else would answer. For a second, old memories tried to claw their way back. The laughter, the partnership, the moment I trusted him. But they didn't sting anymore. They just existed, harmless ghosts in the room. "I'll call you tomorrow," I said quietly, then hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the shop, surrounded by engines ticking as they cooled, and thought about every mile between the man he'd been and the man I'd become. The part of me that wanted him to hurt was gone. What I wanted now was simpler, to live without bitterness, to win without witnesses. But life had a way of testing peace the moment you found it. The next morning, the local paper ran a story. "Whitlock Motors declares bankruptcy. Owner under investigation." His name was everywhere again, but this time, not as the hero. I folded the paper, exhaled, and whispered, "Debt repaid." 2 weeks later, the mayor called, inviting me to a city ceremony, honoring local entrepreneurs who uplifted the community. They wanted me as the guest speaker. I almost refused, but Lyle said, "You've earned that mic. Go tell them how real work sounds." So I did. The hall was full of suits, officials, cameras, people who spoke in polished sentences. When I stepped up to the podium, my palms didn't sweat. I told them the truth, how I'd lost everything because I trusted the wrong person, how I rebuilt piece by piece, how failure taught me the difference between wealth and worth. "You can't repossess a man's will," I said. "You can only test it." The crowd stood when I finished. It wasn't applause I cared about. It was that silence before it, the kind that means your story landed somewhere deep. After the ceremony, a banker from Midland approached with a proposal for expansion, new equipment, more staff, maybe a second location. I smiled and said, "We'll see." That night, I drove home through the quiet back roads, the headlights painting the world gold and silver. Mercy purred beneath me, her engine steady and strong. In the passenger seat sat the letter Jared had sent last year, now creased and faded. I didn't need to open it. I already knew what it said. Apologies cost nothing, but change pays dividends. And maybe that was his debt now, the kind you can't refinance. When I parked, Curtis was waiting outside, holding 2 sodas. "Heard you on the radio," he said, eyes wide. "You sounded like one of those motivational guys." I laughed. "God forbid," I said. "I just told the truth." He grinned. Still not bad for the guy who used to sleep in a truck. I looked around the lit-up shop, the hum of life still moving through it, and nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Not bad at all." The night air felt cleaner than it had in years, and for the first time since that signature on the dotted line, I knew the story wasn't about what Jared took. It was about what I built from the ruin. The reunion came wrapped in summer heat and the sound of crickets. I was under the hood of a Silverado when Curtis jogged out front, waving a phone. "Some guy named Jared's on the line," he said carefully. My hands froze mid-turn of the wrench. "Tell him I'm busy," I said. Voice even. Curtis hesitated. "He says it's important." I wiped my hands on a rag and took the phone, half expecting silence. "Aaron," he said, his voice small, trembling at the edges. "I'm home." 2 words that twisted something I thought had long healed. Then I guess it's about time, I said. Where are you? He wanted to meet at Mom and Dad's house. The same one where we'd once planned that doomed dealership dream. Sunday dinner? Just like old times? Mom's text said. But this time, the invitation felt more like a test of what forgiveness weighed. When I arrived, the air smelled like roast and nostalgia. Dad sat in his recliner, pretending to read the paper but watching the door. Mom fussed over the dishes, humming a nervous hymn. Then Jared walked in, thinner, older, his confidence swapped for exhaustion. "Hey, little brother," he said. His smile faltered when he saw me standing tall. "You look good," he added. "Better than I did last time," I replied. Dinner was tense, a quiet balancing act between comfort and consequence. Mom tried to steer the conversation toward safe waters: work, weather, church. Jared picked at his food, eyes darting like a man counting exits. Finally, he spoke. "I heard about the shop," he said softly. "It's impressive," I nodded. "It's honest work." He flinched like I'd hit him, even though my tone was flat. "I deserve that," he murmured. Dad cleared his throat, voice low. "You boys need to stop talking like strangers." But that's what we'd become. Two strangers who shared a last name and a list of unfinished apologies. After dinner, I stepped onto the porch, needing air. The cicadas screamed like time itself was mocking me. Jared followed a minute later, hands in his pockets. "I didn't come to stir anything up," he said. "I just needed to see you." "You've seen me," I said. "Now what?" He looked out toward the dark fields. "I lost everything," he whispered. "The business, the car, the apartment. It's all gone." His voice cracked. "I know I deserve it. I just didn't think losing you would hurt worse." I stayed silent. He turned to me, tears glassing his eyes. "You have every right to hate me." I took a slow breath. "I don't," I said. "You taught me everything I needed to know about who not to be." He winced, but he didn't argue. "I never meant to destroy you," he said. "I thought I was building something for both of us." "You built it on my name," I replied, "and left me to live in the rubble." He nodded, head low. "I was selfish, and I kept running because I didn't want to face what I did." He looked at me then, eyes red and desperate. "You ever think about hitting me? Getting even?" I shook my head. "No, you gave me something better. A reason." He blinked. "A reason?" "To build something that would outlast your shadow." We stood there in silence. For a while, the porch light buzzing between us. "I came back to make things right," he said finally. "Whatever that means. If you want me to leave, I will. If you want me to work it off, I will." I studied him carefully. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw and honest. "Work it off," I said. "But not for me. For yourself." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Come to the shop tomorrow. Start there. Learn what paying it back feels like when it's earned, not borrowed." His lips parted, like he didn't believe what he heard. "You'd trust me again?" "No," I said, "but I'll give you the chance to rebuild it." The next morning, Jared showed up right on time. Curtis looked at me wide-eyed, but I just nodded toward the bay door. "Give him a broom," I said. For the first week he swept floors, took out trash, fetched tools without a word. He didn't complain. He didn't joke. He just worked, quiet and steady, like a man trying to pray with his hands. I watched from the office, every motion reminding me that remorse wasn't words, it was repetition. Curtis didn't know our full history, but one day he whispered, "He's your brother, huh?" I nodded. "Used to be," I said. "Maybe he will be again." By the end of that month, Jared stopped looking at the clock. He started staying late, helping with small repairs, asking questions. One evening, as we locked up, he said, "I don't deserve this." "Probably not," I said. "But neither did I, and I still had to live through it." He smiled faintly, a weary kind of gratitude crossing his face. "You're a better man than me," he said. "No," I replied, "just one who learned slower." That night, I watched him drive away in a borrowed truck, taillights fading into the dark, and I realized something. The debt was paid, not by money, not by apology, but by humility. The next few weeks unfolded like the quiet aftermath of a storm. Jared came to the shop every morning without fail, always early, always tired, but always trying. He swept, mopped, organized, and sometimes just stood in silence, eyes fixed on the floor like he was afraid to look too far forward. I didn't push him. I let the work do what words never could. Redemption, I'd learned, doesn't arrive in speeches, it creeps in through repetition. Curtis started calling him Mr. J, though I noticed Jared never corrected him to Jared. He just smiled, humbled by the small respect he hadn't earned yet. Watching him now felt strange. I'd imagined this moment for years, but vengeance had been replaced by something quieter, heavier, pity maybe, or peace. One Friday evening, after we closed, I found him sitting on the back steps behind the garage, smoking a cigarette down to the paper. "You shouldn't be here after hours," I said. He chuckled. "Neither should you." His voice had softened over time, like it had learned gentleness the hard way. I sat beside him, both of us facing the orange dusk bleeding over the cornfields. "You know," he said, "I thought regret would fade after a while. It doesn't." He flicked the ash into the dirt. "Every day I think about that loan, about how you looked at me that night. You didn't even yell. That's what hurt most." I stayed quiet, letting him spill what needed spilling. "I told myself you'd bounce back, that you were tough enough to handle it, but that was just my way of not feeling like the villain." He turned toward me, eyes red-rimmed and honest. "You ever hate me?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, every morning for a long time." He nodded like he expected that answer. "But you kept going," he said. "You built all this." He gestured toward the shop, the hum of cooling engines still faint in the background, while I kept falling apart. "Difference is," I said, "you kept looking for shortcuts." I stopped. He smirked sadly. "Guess you finally became the older brother." I laughed, the sound raw but real. "Guess I did." The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was acknowledgement. The next day Jared showed up early again, but this time he didn't go straight to work. He handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Everything I have left," he said. "Sold my watch, my old tools, even my laptop. It's not much, but it's yours." I looked inside. Cash, a few hundred maybe, folded neatly like an offering. "Keep it," I said. "You owe me something different now." He frowned. "What's that?" "Yourself," I said simply. "Just be better than the man who left me with nothing." He nodded, swallowing hard, then tucked the envelope back into his jacket. It felt like the first real exchange we'd had in years. That afternoon, Mom stopped by unannounced, carrying pie and questions. "He's working here?" she asked, surprise and worry battling in her tone. "Yeah," I said, wiping my hands. "He's learning." She sighed, setting the pie down. "He's been at the church every night, too. Says he's trying to make amends." I nodded. "He is." She looked at me then, her eyes wet but proud. "You did what your father couldn't, brought him back." I shook my head. "I didn't bring him back. I just stopped keeping him gone." Her hand found my arm, warm and trembling. "You've turned hurt into something holy, Aaron." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just said, "It was never about revenge. It was about respect." A few nights later, we were closing up when a man pulled into the lot. A banker I recognized from the old days. He got out, surprised to see us both there. "Whitlock's," he said. "Didn't think I'd ever see you two in the same place again." Jared straightened his back, voice calm. "We're rebuilding," he said. The man nodded slowly, almost impressed. "Guess everyone deserves a second chance." After he left, Jared laughed quietly. "He doesn't even know how true that is." "Let him figure it out," I said. "We've got work to do." The following week, Jared came into the office with grease on his shirt and a different kind of light in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said, "maybe I could start over in a small way. Nothing big, just honest." I smiled. "That's the only kind that lasts." He nodded, gripping the doorframe like he needed to hold on to something steady. "You ever think about what we were before all this?" he asked. "All the time," I said. "But the past doesn't owe us anything. It just reminds us where not to go again." He exhaled, the sound somewhere between relief and surrender. "You're good at this," he said, "at being better." I looked at him. "No," I said softly. "I just stayed." When he finally left for the night, I stood in the doorway, watching his taillights fade into the dusk. There was no dramatic ending, no grand apology that fixed everything, just two brothers learning how to exist in the same truth again. That was enough. Maybe redemption wasn't about earning forgiveness. It was about finally understanding the cost of it, and in that understanding Jared's guilt became something useful. It became work, sweat, and silence. It became the proof that regret, when lived right, can rebuild more than it destroyed. Autumn came slow that year, golden and forgiving. The days shortened, and the air smelled like cut grass and cooling engines. I stood outside the shop one morning, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the fields. The sign that once felt like defiance now looked like peace. Back road motors, letters painted by a man who had learned to live with his past instead of running from it. Jared pulled in early, as he had for months now, parking the same beat-up Ford he'd borrowed from a neighbor. He waved from the window, and I waved back without thinking. For the first time in years, that motion didn't feel heavy. It just felt human. "You ready for another long one?" he called out. "Always," I said. "That's how we do it here." Inside, the shop hummed with rhythm, tools clanking, Curtis whistling off key, Jared laughing at his own mistakes. There were still moments where memory slipped in like a draft. His betrayal, my nights sleeping in the truck, the bank letters that smelled like fear. But they didn't own me anymore. They were ghosts, and ghosts can't live where light does. At lunch, we sat around the workbench eating sandwiches, joking about nothing in particular. Jared said, "You ever think we'd end up like this?" I smiled. "Not once." He nodded, serious again. "I'm glad you didn't give up on me." I looked at him for a long moment before replying. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because I had to live with me." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he finally did. After lunch, I took a drive alone in Mercy. The highway stretched like a ribbon across the horizon, fields gold and endless on both sides. I rolled down the window and let the wind take the noise out of my head. The truck's engine hummed steady, a song built from persistence. Somewhere along that road, I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Jared, not at life, not even at myself for being blind. What happened wasn't my fault, but my healing was my responsibility. And somewhere between debt and forgiveness, I'd found something better than revenge. I'd found freedom. When I got back, Jared was waiting by the office door, holding a folded piece of paper. "Got something for you," he said, handing it over. It was a note, simple, handwritten. "Aaron, I can't repay what I took, but I can build something that honors what you rebuilt. Thank you for letting me try. Jared." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into my shirt pocket. "You're serious about this?" I asked. He nodded. "I've been talking to the church. They're starting a community garage for people who can't afford repairs. They need someone to run it." I smiled. "You?" "Yeah," he said softly. "Guess it's time I fixed something without breaking it first." For the first time, pride flickered inside me. Not for his success, but for his honesty. That night, the shop was quiet. I stayed late, walking through the empty bays, running my hand over the smooth metal of engines waiting to live again. Every noise felt softer now, every shadow less sharp. I sat at my desk, pulled out my old notebook, the one where I used to track payments, and flipped to the last page. The word "owed" still sat at the top, faded and tired. I drew a line through it, clean and final. Then I wrote one new word underneath: paid. Not because the money was gone, but because the weight was. I closed the notebook, leaned back, and let the stillness wrap around me. The next morning I visited Mom and Dad. They sat on the porch, wrapped in quilts, watching the leaves fall. "You look lighter," Mom said, smiling. "Must be all that hard work." "Maybe it's finally done paying off," I said. Dad nodded. "Your brother told me what he's doing. Sounds like you two found peace." I sipped my coffee. "We found something close enough." Mom reached for my hand. "Sometimes that's all peace is," she said. "Close enough." I looked at the yard where Jared and I once played football until the sun went down, and I thought about how time doesn't erase pain. It just teaches you how to live alongside it without letting it drive. A week later, Jared came by to say goodbye before leaving for the new project. He stood awkwardly by the truck, shifting his weight. "Guess this is it," he said. "For now," I replied. "You sure you're ready?" He smiled faintly. "I'm not sure, but I'm willing." He extended his hand, and I shook it. Firm, steady, final. "Take care of yourself," I said, "and take care of the people who remind you of who you used to be." He nodded, eyes glassy. "I will." Then he climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove off into the horizon where the morning sun was breaking open. I watched until the dust settled and the road was quiet again. That evening, I sat outside the shop as the sky turned crimson and gold. Curtis locked up and waved goodnight. The air smelled of metal and earth, honest things. I thought about the man I'd been when this all started. Scared, bitter, lost. I thought about the one I'd become. Steadfast, scarred, but free. Debt had been my teacher, pain had been my compass, and regret, in the end, had paid me back with wisdom. The road hadn't led me where I wanted, but it led me exactly where I needed to be. I took one last sip of coffee, the wind brushing against my face like a promise. Maybe we never really settle our debts. We just learn how to carry them differently. The stars began to appear, quiet. quiet and certain. I looked up and whispered, "We're even now, brother." Then I smiled, because for the first time, I meant it. If this story found you when you needed it, share it with someone learning to rebuild their life one honest day at a time. And tell me, if the person who left you drowning in their mistakes came back seeking forgiveness, would you offer them peace or make them earn it piece by piece?